Silksong is one of those games where the legend behind it is almost more important than the actual game itself. In 2014, a Kickstarter appeared for a game featuring a cute little knight wielding a nail with distinctive pitch-black eyes, and it did pretty well, exceeding its goal of $35,000 Australian to receive 57,138 Australian. This unlocked a number of stretch goals, some new zones and bonus bosses and quests, but the most anticipated was the second playable character, a certain princess with a distinctive pair of horns. After a few free updates to the base game, fans were eagerly awaiting that final incentive. And wait they did. Eventually, word came from Team Cherry that while they did intend to add Hornet to Hollow Knight, they wanted to do more than that. So they began making new enemies, zones, until eventually, what was supposed to be a free update became a paid DLC, which would eventually grow into its own separate game, taking on the name Silksong. For reference, the original Hollow Knight released on February 24th, 2017. Godmaster, the final update, which added a massive boss rush gauntlet, released on August 23rd, 2018. 7 years passed, and over time, the very name itself mutated into an almost religious mantra. Every Nintendo Direct or gaming conference would feature a number of devotees donning their holy clown makeup, asking, pleading with Team Cherry to release something, any sign that their beloved god was real. And their faith was rewarded, albeit sparsely. There would indeed be brief glimpses, and the fandom would convene upon the footage, ravenous and enthralled, their eyes fully bathed in a haunting orange glow. But it wouldn't be enough. Release dates would be teased and then delayed, most infamously being in 2022, when a joint Xbox and Bethesda conference, before Microsoft acquired Bethesda, featured a slew of games that were all targeting a 12-month release.
Our show is focused on games you can play over the next 12 months.
None of them did, including Silksong. It is here where the fervor turned into a strange madness. The desperation and desire for the game began to seep out of the vessel, where Silksong became a new Wins Half-Life 3 or Wins Marvel, to the point where at the Game Awards, Jeff Keighley, the man who bound E3 and devoured its power, would regularly make reference to it. Whether it was simply to get the fans to stop clogging every presentation's chat with mentions of Silksong, or genuine curiosity at what could possibly be driving these people into such a zeal, everyone wanted to see it. And then the bomb dropped, September 4th, 2025. A day which will live, if not in infamy, then in humor, as multiple indie devs flee in abject terror to try to escape from the sheer black hole of demand that slammed onto the calendar. A black hole that, as of writing, has devoured over 3 million souls, including my own. As a bit of warning, I will be drawing a number of comparisons between Hollow Knight and Silksong, which is going to necessitate me spoiling quite a bit of both. I'll keep Silksong's narrative spoilers to a minimum until later segments, but consider that I'm not going to hesitate talking about Hollow Knight at all from frame 1. While Farloom, Silksong's setting, is far from Hollow Nest, its traces are still felt in the world building, and concerning who and what Hornet is. Silksong begins with a cutscene of Hornet being carried in an ornate cage by a group of hooded bugs, until a strange glimmering butterfly taps the cage, causing an eruption and destroying the bridge, hurtling everyone into the abyss below. From there, you claw your wounded self out of a beautiful, mossy cavern using a kit that, while similar to the Knight, is distinct enough even here to require a slight reorientation. The first is the dive. No longer being a straight down slash, Hornet instead launches herself diagonally forward and down with her sewing needle slightly ahead and beneath her body, bouncing off any enemy or solid object the needle makes contact with. I'll be up front. I do not like this dive. Not because it is different, but because it's a bit unintuitive to grasp. Whenever you think of any sort of diving attack, there is an assumption that it will carry you all the way to the ground come hell or high water. This dive doesn't, only lunging forward a slight amount before Hornet loses the hitbox and begins to descend to the ground. To the dive's credit, once you get into the rhythm of it, it's very easy to bounce back and forth on an enemy's head quickly. Unfortunately, my biggest issue is how it works with Hornet's visual design. In the heat of the moment, it's easy to confuse her head with the needle's tip. I just kept underjumping and bonking my head into enemies over and over again. This doesn't just affect combat, it also affects platforming as well. Pogoing, as it's called, where you bounce off of enemies and hazards by down-slashing them, is a core mechanic to Hollow Knight. It's a skill that Silksong expects you to understand rather quickly. Once you start running into these red bulbs in the second biome that leads you up to a higher floor, it only gets more and more mandatory. By the fourth, or third, if you're baller enough to take down a certain mini-boss earlier than intended, you're expected to chain these dives at different angles and timings that, to me, just isn't intuitive. It can be done, and it does feel great to master it, but, as we'll discuss later, it isn't necessarily something you have to live with forever. The other major difference is the heel, or binding, as it's called. With 8 threads on her spool, Hornet can channel a heel in place for roughly a second. If she succeeds, you replenish 3 hit points instantly, a major upgrade to the Knight needing to channel for each individual mask. However, this heal is highly committal. Once you start it, you can't cancel it. And if you get hit while channeling... Nope, that's bad. Not only do you lose the heal, but all of the silk you spent on the attempt is wasted. I love this change, for multiple reasons. Despite the Knight being able to cancel his channel at no cost, he was always forced to root himself to the ground. Hornet, by contrast, can bind in the air, which gives the heal an additional utility as an air stall, and gives her more safe spaces and arenas to recover safely. It also provides a better incentive to using your silk offensively. The Knight did have strong offensive uses for his soul, but because his healing was so cheap and easy to spend, I found myself constantly just healing every time I got hurt. It allowed me to play recklessly and just face tank most regular enemies without too much thought. Of course, you could still die, but other than just killing the enemy faster, there wasn't any other incentive to using the spells. Hornet, by contrast, wants to spend her silk more aggressively. Thanks to some upgrades, she will be able to passively regenerate up to 1 to 3 threads from empty. And since she requires so much silk to heal, hoarding it to keep a heal in reserve will only waste resources and reduce your damage potential. Ideally, you'd want to hover between 5 to 6 threads so that you can quickly get up to heal or burn it as soon as you can to tap into the silk heart. Of course, this level of micromanagement starts to matter less as your spool grows, and you can store up to 2 heals at a time, or up to 5 casts of skills. You will still have tense moments where you are desperate to try and scrape the resources needed for a clutch heal, but when you get it, you'll have a bit more cushion to work with. In theory. Once we pass the first boss, Moss Mother, and recover from passing out, we'll discover 2 important things about Silksong. The first is that we are given our primary objective early: ascend to the cathedral. We don't know anything else, or even how to get there, but it is on our map as a literal guiding star pointing northward, and to be frank, I think this is an excellent call. Most Metroidvania games will start with core objectives, a starting cause or reason for you to navigate the massive labyrinth at all. In Castlevania, it's to either kill Dracula or to stop someone from either reviving or usurping him. In Metroid, it was to destroy Mother Brain, or hunt down all of the Metroids, or exterminate the X-parasite infesting a research station. Hollow Knight, by contrast, doesn't give you one for quite a while. You're essentially dropped into Hollow Nest and driven to explore more out of abject curiosity than anything else, completely unaware of the crisis eating away at Hollow Nest until Hornet flat out tells you about it in the City of Tears, then getting directed to seek out the Dream Nail, the three dreamers sealing the titular Hollow Knight's tomb, and then finally kill him. This method is a bit of a double-edged sword because of how Hollow Knight's world is designed. You start just to the upper left of the center of the map, ironically less than a stone's throw away from the game's final boss, even if you don't know it yet, and then bounce around the forgotten crossroads until you can find an accessible route. But of course, since it's easy to sequence break with some creative pogoing, it's very easy to get into places you aren't meant to get into just yet, which, combined with Hollow Knight's unique cartography style of being completely blind until you find Cornifer and buy a biome's map, can risk the player getting completely lost and just quitting out of frustration. This also leads to a bit of confusion involving its questing. Like Dark Souls, various NPCs are navigating all around Hollow Nest on their own objectives. There is no proper quest system in this game, instead requiring you to find them in different places at different times along your journey. It's not quite as obtuse as FromSoft, where if you don't find them in time or you go to places in the wrong order, you just fail their plot on accident, but it can feel random whenever you do run into someone. By contrast, Farloom is much more linear. You will travel in an S-shaped pathway toward the Citadel, starting from the bottom left, heading east, then ascending up from the far lands into Greymoor, then heading west, and finally ascending toward the front door of the Citadel. While this is far more rigid, it serves an important narrative purpose. Farloom is not one interconnected city. It's essentially a remote mountain trail, one that is traveled by many bugs on a sacred pilgrimage. This framing device provides an excellent path to repeatedly run into other characters because most of them are all going to the same place. Some are going for faith, others for vengeance, and more still for reasons all their own. But they all offered some treasured company in a lonely world declining into ruin. But I digress. After all, I said the first reason back when we were rescued by the old crone, didn't I? Hornet can talk. 3 simple words that drastically changes so much about how the narrative is conveyed to the player. In almost all Souls-likes and many Metroidvanias, the player character is silent. It makes sense. You're not exactly going to be talking to all of the twisted horrors trying to eat your face. Loneliness is a core vibe of the genres, both Metroidvania and Souls-like. Whether the protagonist is their own person or just a created character self-insert. But it does force the game's narrative to do a lot of extra work by forcing the player to decipher the narrative through item descriptions, log entries, bestiaries, and gravestones. Hollow Knight and Silksong have plenty of living characters, but because the knight is quite literally a hollow vessel devoid of personality or soul, everyone has to monologue at him as if they're talking to a brick wall. He never contributes to a conversation or offer any insight because he literally has nothing. It's actually the whole point for why he exists. But Hornet isn't a vessel. She is a person, with her own wants, beliefs, traumas, and vices. She is a woman who, thanks to her years of experience and hybrid lineage of Weaver and Worm, has a unique understanding over what calamity is currently afflicting Farloom. She's able to ask questions about Farloom's culture and people, while still contributing to the overall question of why did the Citadel want her? The writers do an excellent job conveying her personality in both the bestiary entries and how she interacts with people. Being a near-ageless demigoddess, she has lived long enough to understand that life is both precious and death inevitable, knowing that she is far more capable than most of Farloom's citizenry at handling threats and feral wildlife, but never lording it over them, merely advising them to try and stay out of danger. She doesn't help people out of a typical sense of heroic good, but more in a way that the player would. She won't promise anything, but if she happens to be in the area, or if it would get her a reward that can help her achieve her goal, she'll do what she can. Willing to take life, but not wanting to do it needlessly, all the while having this undercurrent of loneliness that can only come from untold years of watching friends and loved ones wither away and die, either due to the uncaring wheel of time or just the sheer danger of the world. She also likes soft and fluffy bugs, often lamenting how, if only some weren't hostile, she'd love to keep them as a pet. It is thanks to Hornet being a communicable person that Silksong's narrative is far easier to follow. It's not that complicated, and you can likely put together a good portion of it once you realize that the objects the Farloomians revere as their idols of worship and their currency are the same thing. But compared to the usual Souls-like style, you won't need to go to YouTube for someone to explain most of it to you. But Silksong is more than its narrative and structure. It's about the thrill of battle. And to truly understand the dance of combat, we need to properly understand our tools. Hollow Knight had a fairly simple system to handle its charms. You were allotted a certain amount of notches, and every charm had an associated budget that ranged from 0 to 4. So long as you were in budget, you could do whatever you wanted. Actually, you could go over budget, but as a cost, you would take double damage. This system offered a huge amount of flexible customization for players to make whatever build they wanted, but could just as easily make you so powerful as to just break the game in half simply by stacking the best ones. Thus, Silksong opts to instead segregate charms into 3 categories, calling them tools. They can be found in the world, rewarded for completing side quests and killing bosses, assembled through the use of craft metal or purchased from various vendors. Some of them are upgradable, or even have hidden variants depending on who or where you decide to take certain quest items. Red tools are active weapons that each have their own limited ammunition, similar to sub-weapons from Castlevania. They range from throwing knives, boomerangs, armor-piercing javelins, bombs, drugs, charcoal pine resin, the pistol from Halo Combat Evolved, and more. An embarrassment of more. Ammunition is replenished by automatically converting bone shards at benches. Compared to rosaries, shards are weirdly uncommon, dropping in far smaller quantities and primarily from feral bugs, hidden fossil troves, and shard bundles. There is an implied cost for every weapon you use, and some of the more powerful ones are quite expensive. I have seen some people online wish that the tools didn't bother with ammo, or for the shards to just not exist entirely. I can empathize, since it does suck to run yourself dry trying to kill a tough boss and then just be stuck making attempts without them, particularly early on when you might only have 3 or 4 tools at your disposal. Unfortunately, if the shard system did not exist, I can promise you that by the early mid-game, you would be able to just break every boss in half far too easily.
It all starts with this. A jewel containing the ultimate power.
Cogflies in particular, I think, are likely the reason why the shard ammo system exists in the first place. These little beats fly into enemies and hit them 5 or 6 times before they die. Even after they were nerfed to no longer heal their HP when changing rooms, the sheer power of just mindlessly deploying 4 in a room is hard to ignore. Combine them with the pollen pouch, which causes all of your weapons to apply a ticking poison, and bosses just die. For the sake of my own enjoyment, I needed to stop using them. Blue tools are a blend of offensive, defensive, and economy-focused passives. They're all generally upside, with niche applications, and while some are a lot more flexible or ubiquitously good, the niche ones still have some use cases to warrant them. Some of them simply increase your damage, or the range of your basic attack. Others can change core mechanics, like turning the binding heal from a single channel for 3 into a double channel for 4. There aren't a lot of blue tools that are just straight up more damage, and the ones that exist don't tend to overlap as much as the first game. Combined with how Hornet is taking more damage compared to the Knight on average, helps to solve the full Unga or bust problem the first game had. You still can, but it's worth hedging yourself a little. I myself ended up sticking to taking a balance of the 3, though the world is your oyster to find whatever combos appeal to you. Yellow tools are the utility ones, and these are the ones that I think are in a uniquely unfortunate position. Most of these don't affect your combat power, and the one that does has a major downside. Instead, they affect navigation, exploration, and your resource gain. The major problem with these tools has to do with systems that are technically outside of the tool system. How the map works, and how the game's economy works. Let's start with the map. Like Hollow Knight, you do not get to see your map of an area until you either purchase it or find it hidden somewhere in the biome. The map also does not reveal itself as you travel, only updating once you sit down at a bench after you have purchased the quill. Once you do not see where you are on it, unless you have the compass equipped. It is entirely possible to beat the game without using the compass. Silksong and Hollow Knight both have rooms that are uniquely shaped, with landmarks drawn onto the map itself. And thanks to some purchasable marker pins, benches and fast travel points are automatically demarcated as you unlock them. However, having to constantly suss out where you are on the map does eat up a lot of focus. I love cartography. It's one of the reasons why I love Etrian Odyssey so much, but after a while, I can't help but admit that at a certain point, it's just easier to slot in the compass and never bother to replace it, even if I'm grinding a boss fight over and over. Now, concerning the economy, for both narrative and pacing reasons, the amount of rosaries you get early on are sparse. Only sentient bugs will have them, and they tend to only drop in the low single digits per kill. And like Hollow Knight, your rosaries are at risk if you die while your cocoon, read soul, is exposed. Like Geo, you can find them in troves all over the world, either laced onto strings, in treasure chests, or on breakable statues. However, unlike Geo, rosaries being round beads have an obnoxious tendency to roll on the ground. And since both rosaries and shards will disappear if they fall onto spikes, you tend to lose a significant amount of them. Unless you equip the magnetite brooch, which will automatically pull rosaries to you as soon as they drop. I think you see where I'm going with this. With how expensive and how tied to everything rosaries are, they unlock benches and fast travel points. They purchase spool fragments, mask fragments, they are donated to fulfill side quests, they allow you to buy shard bundles to fuel your weapons tools, they buy tools, etc. It is a genuinely hard argument to make not to just equip both the compass and the brooch. And that is 2 whole slots, which is quite a commitment of resources that, for most people, are going to be defaulted on. You can eventually equip more than these 2, of course, but believe it or not, there is still one more tool that also feels defaulted. The magnetite dice are a blue trinket that is inconsistent enough to qualify for yellow. Randomly, though at a low chance, they will negate a hit of damage for you. This will save your life, And eventually, every time you hear the telltale blue gong of the dice high rolling, it will feel as if the hand of God herself has intervened on your behalf. They can intervene both from environmental and boss damage, so with these three, it is genuinely hard to slot in anything else. And even then, the options aren't that great, except for the Ascendant's Grip, which is a godsend on your fingers when tackling extreme platforming sections. The rest are either even more niche than this, or have a distinct downside that, in my experience, just isn't worth dealing with. Unfortunately, I don't see a solution to this problem without compromising on the game's vision. I've never liked the compass taking up a resource slot, and obviously, equip this so you can get money just feels like a bit of a dick move, but even long after I no longer needed any rosaries in the late game, I just never felt motivated to remove them. Part of this, I do feel, comes with one of the game's most interesting, but perhaps not quite perfect systems, the Crest system. I told you before that while I despised Hornet's Dive, it wasn't something you had to live with forever. And this is why. A strange hybrid between a weapon and class and loadout system, Crests are something that fundamentally changes how Hornet works at a core level. They each have their own swing animations and hitboxes, tool slots, and core passives. One allows you to use 3 weapons at once and reload in combat. Another lets you equip 3 Silkbind skills. One gets rid of your heal and instead jacks up Hornet's damage while giving her lifesteal. Another one causes you to rip out soul orbs from enemies to replenish your silk even faster. Even if you don't end up liking them, finding a new one feels incredibly special and rare. I just wish I could have decided on which one I used on something other than the pogo. Were this any other Souls-like, I could decide purely on the combat merits alone, but Hollow Knight is just as much a platformer as it is a combat game. And once you find a downswing that you like and fits with you, it is extremely hard to try and adapt to a new one. I ended up sticking with the very first crest I found, Reaper. It is a balanced crest, with an even allotment of tool slots, a slower attack speed, and a stubby upswing, but the soul orbs from healing, and the truck-sized downswing hitbox were worth far more than what I lost. My rigidity did result in finding extra memory lockets, this game's version of charm notches, to feel a bit underwhelming, but I can just as easily see someone more flexible than I having a ball creating builds for each crest. All of this to say that while there are more restrictions to your loadout compared to the first Hollow Knight, I firmly believe that Silksong allows for far more player expression with its system in comparison. And what better way to exact that skill expression than in the cacophony of combat? Well, shit. There has been a great amount of discourse surrounding this game and its difficulty, and while I don't agree with all of it, I'm not going to gloat and say that people who are getting filtered are in the wrong. Get good is a phrase that has mutated over the years from a motivating mantra, a sort of, hang in there man, you got this affirmation, to a smug, unhelpful quip that occasionally pendulum swings back and forth between the two, while also just swerving into an ironic shitpost. This game is hard. Hollow Knight was too, later on and deep into the optional encounters, but Silksong starts out raw and unlubricated by the time you hit the second boss, Bellbeast. She's not the first enemy to do 2 hearts of damage, but she is the one that makes it sink in. You are always at a trade disadvantage, and you need to play like it. You can stagger bosses, but these are precious moments to either heal, grab some free silk, or to capitalize on it with a devastating strike. Clashing with enemies by swinging your sword directly into their attack isn't going to stop them. At best, it gives you a moment to try and get out, but it's not likely. And against giants like Bellbeast, it's practically a non-factor. It is incredibly easy for you to get caught inside of her body, take 2 damage from the leap, fail to get out of her hitbox in time, and then take 2 more. That is 80% of your life gone in a matter of like 2 seconds. Later on, this will be easier to avoid thanks to some of the most powerful movement options I have ever seen in a Metroidvania, but until you have them, all you've got to work with is jump, pogo, and casually strutting across the battlefield. Fortunately, most bosses have tells that you can learn that forecast what you can do. When Bell Beast burrows on the sides, she will either slide across the ground or jump in the air. When she appears in the middle, she's vulnerable, but bells are going to fall down beside her. It's learnable, and fairly simple. It's just punishing when you get caught off guard or get cornered. And for a good while, this methodology will serve you well. Soon you'll be dealing with enemies who start to be more reactive to you. They don't just follow a scripted pattern, they specifically target where your position is and adjust on the fly. Lace, who adopts a similar role to what Hornet did for the knight in the first game, is likely going to be your first experience with this. She fights like Virgil, if instead of being a weeb, decided to study at the fictional kingdom of France and take up fencing. Striking with quick lunges, a forward-moving 3-hit combo, parries, and a flurry of stabs. On instinct, you might think, if I just bounce on her head, I should be able to ignore her moveset. But this leaves you vulnerable to her rising slash, which, this early on, you can avoid fairly easy, but this isn't going to last. Bosses will get faster and faster, to the point where when they go for the call-out, you aren't likely to be able to react fast enough to escape. Finally, there is a third archetype that is going to require some fighting game terminology to explain: the set play. Set play in fighting games is all about putting your opponent into a disadvantageous position. Pop quiz. Milia Rage has knocked you onto the ground and has set up a disc over your body. The disc is going to force you to block, but do you block low or high? She can approach from both angles easily, even striking behind your head in a mix-up. Which do you choose? High or low? Left or right? The correct answer, and the one you need to keep close in your heart in Silksong, is don't be in that position in the first place. There are some bosses who brought this idea to mind, but it didn't formulate until I ran into the first boss that made the game really click with me. The little gremlin that could, Widow. Widow is chaos incarnate, scrabbling across the arena, setting traps and pulling bells in from all angles, using the sheer sensory noise to overwhelm you, either by hiding her wind-ups behind them, or using them as a distraction to flank you, literally putting on a puppet show as she robs you blind. As these three bosses' methodologies grow and intertwine, we see Team Cherry begin to creep in more mechanics to try and squeeze you more and more. The giants soon begin to spawn ads that fly erratically, constrict your environment with traps, or the arena itself is just smaller by default. They may approach from multiple angles at once, try to herd you into a corner, or there will just be 2 of them, doubling the amount of screen space occupied. Duelists, meanwhile, get faster and faster. Their patterns and combos get more complex, until eventually they begin to just straight up Roman cancel their own strings to try and catch you in the middle of evading. They will start to block, deflect, or quick dodge your attacks unless you strike at narrow windows or use your tools. And finally, the set play bosses just attack non-stop from all angles, forcing you to quickly check your flanks, account for traps on the ground, or just choke the screen in a flurry of blades, explosions, bells, and death. All culminating to the very hardest late-game encounters that weave multiple archetypes together into chaotic nightmares worthy of slamming your head into over and over again, demanding you to account for not 1 permutation, not 2 of every attack, but 3 or more. The sheer gap in scope between Bell Beast and a late-game boss is almost parody. Silksong started as a DLC, and I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that Silksong's late game feels like a DLC of a DLC, in terms of just how much it demands of you. You will have the tools to do it. You will be able to sprint on command, Run up walls, suspend yourself in the air, pogo off of enemies, and use a grappling hook to yank yourself across the screen or into enemies. You will be expected to. The fact that you can stay in the air in perpetuity will need to become second nature. You will have to fly like a spider or die. This jump-in skill and demand isn't exclusive to bosses either. Regular enemies themselves can be far, far more complex than necessary. Consider this humble ant soldier in the 4th biome. He has a 3-hit combo, a block, a jump and dive kick, and a lunge that covers the ground. Does this sound familiar? Yes, he is quite literally just Lace. Red. And while most ground enemies aren't this level of complex, anything more advanced than a basic pilgrim usually has at least 2 attacks. With flying enemies either content to chuck bells and needles at you, or they'll dive at erratic patterns and quickly evade you if you try to just jump slash them. You need to try and get above them, or use tools like the boomerang to strike them from a distance. Now this all seems a bit extra, right? And it is. But it makes perfect sense once we get into why enemies are designed this way. I have mixed feelings about these Gauntlet rooms. I suspect the arenas are the reason why a lot of enemies are over-designed. Individually, they can be annoying, but locked in a small box and in waves, their overlaps can provide for some cruel mix-ups. To bring up the ants from Hunter's March again, these flying ones can provide cover to the soldiers, making just pogoing on their heads unsafe to do. Again, I want to reiterate, I do not think this is bad in concept. In fact, I think used judiciously, they can make for excellent checkpoints and knowledge. You learn how each individual enemy works, and then see how they synergize together. The problem is that there are so goddamn many of these arenas! Most biomes have at least one of them. Some of the bigger ones can have 2 or 3, and while not all of them are mandatory, you sure as hell are going to run into them all the more trying to scrape for upgrades to help strengthen you for bosses. And as a continuation about the strictness of the in-game economy I mentioned earlier, enemies do not drop shards or rosaries in these things. Which means that just like with bosses, if you get stuck and you're starving for tools, you're kinda just fucked. And thanks to how the cocoon works, you can just feel trapped, slamming your head in them over and over as frustration builds. This is a bit of a tangent, but Team Cherry clearly knew this could be an issue, and they added a solution. See this creepy, slightly off-white little squirmy dude? This is a Silk Eater. You can crush this little milk grape and he will fetch your cocoon for you from anywhere, which is an excellent little bit of quality of life, except the earliest you are likely to run into one of these is in Act 2. Technically, you can find one in Act 1 in 2 spots. One is in a hidden alcove in the Blasted Sands, which is the penultimate biome before getting into Act 1. Or you could go into an optional blighted hellscape, which I promise I will get into detail later, to find an NPC who is acting just off-putting enough that he will immediately set off every red flag this side of a Bucks game.
Strong you are, mistress. Small, but so deadly. And your scent, well aged. You have come to claim me. I am yours. I am your humble slave.
And if you come back to him later on, he will just give them to you. For free. But I promise you, if you can get to here, you probably won't need these anymore. There is this funny pattern that happens with gauntlets, where at first, when you are new, they're rough to handle. Enemies are kinda tanky, so it takes a while to chew through them. Then, as you learn to use your silk more offensively, they get easier again, once you know which targets are priority kills. But then they get longer, and longer, and longer, and then they start to chain together into multiple ones in a row. Then they start to act as mandatory preludes of boss fights.
And it just gets obnoxious.
I shudder to imagine what Team Cherry will do if they make a God Home DLC for Silksong one day. Because I can just imagine, if they include the Gauntlet preludes, well, someone will still probably do it with all binds because, let's be real, there is nothing more human than looking at some great and terrible mountain and saying bet. But good lord, would it be exhausting. So, we've gone over all of the mechanics, but I still do want to discuss some of the optional stuff, particularly the area that, I just know, people want to hear about. So I'm going to drop a spoiler warning, because we're going to be speaking more freely concerning matters involving Act 1 and Act 2. I told you before that the pathway through Act 1 is basically an S-shape. Well, I've lied by omission. The S-path is the path the pilgrims take to get there, where they pass through Bellheart, Shellwood, and then brave the scouring sands of the Blasted Lands, where they are measured by the judges, and the divine reward that awaits them once they reach that holy mount. Oh, this is about to suck, isn't it? Well, shit. Is enslavement. Beneath the gilded, opulent halls of the Citadel is a machinist nightmare. Claustrophobic halls filled with exposed saws and gears, scalding jets of steam, and fattened mites who have fed well on the malnourished slaves who fall into the darkened spaces, uncared for and long forgotten. Their only comfort are benches that require payment per use, and a single confession booth. Speak now. Thy confession will be heard. You have confessed a sin most grave, and must by works cleanse yourself. Return to your task and work off cycle, neither eating nor supping until new cycle begins. By the grace of Farloom Eternal, may you never tire, toil, and be forgiven. Jesus Christ! The ugliness of the Citadel is at last laid bare. While the pilgrims slave away to maintain the industry and opulence of the upper classes, they have engaged in profligate vanity, experimenting with artificial life, and so much worse. I want to get into the effects the Citadel has had on the land itself. There is another pathway into the Citadel. Just as Bowser's Castle in Super Mario World had a back door for those who had the gumption for it, the Citadel does too. High up in the gloomy rains of Greymoor is a little hidden alcove. There's not many clues that it exists. Just a couple of spike wheels hanging curiously in the air that you can pogo into. One could just be trying to scour Greymoor of all its secrets, but then... There's an elevator shortcut to get back here. How curious. Well, may as well unlock it and keep going into Sinner's Path. Sinner's Path is the start of an optional flank of the game that decides to stop playing nice. That might seem odd given how I have waxed on about how vicious the combat can be, but here's the thing. All of those things are just damage. Sinner's Path introduces something that will do worse. This land is defiled, fetid with blight and malady. But it is the water itself that writhes in this forsaken place. One dip into it, and you become infested. Now, one could make a Miyazaki poison swamp joke here, but as I said, the maggots won't hurt you. But you'll wish they did. No. They're more than happy to keep Hornet alive, after all. Any good parasite needs a healthy host. They're content to devour your silk faster than you can regenerate it. And there is no duration or waiting out this infestation once they're on you. They stay on you until you cast them off, either by resting at a bench or getting off a successful bind. And as one final little screw you don't get any healing from the bind. This forces you to be aggressive to try and get ahead of the maggots eating the silk. Unfortunately, there is little easy prey in this blighted place. You have roaches, feral dogs that will lunge abruptly and snap you in their jaws. One flying enemy will bombard you with a spiked bola that bursts into spiked balls, and a swashbuckler who controls a large amount of space with a massive flurry of slashes. And finally, there are these massive hooded guys who lash at you with their chains and can move surprisingly quickly to punch you in the gut. All of them except for the bola do 2 damage. But it's alright. After all, there is a bench that is well placed in the middle of the biome, so all we have to do is pay our due and... 60 rosaries for a bench. God damn. Well, not much we can do about it, sadly. Ooh, what's up here? More death and horrible spike traps. Now that's what I'm talking about. Are you fucking kidding me? This is the easy part of this section, by the way. You must understand that hope is a mistake. Team Cherry has placed a number of little pranks in this game. The trap benches in particular are the more infamous, but I'd argue there are a number of hidden falling rocks, collapsing floors, and other bits of devious environmental design that qualify. Most of these are generally harmless, or the disarming mechanism for the traps aren't that far from the source itself. What is curious is that this east to northeastern quadrant seems particularly designed to be the most hostile in the game of all. Now, it's not the most difficult in terms of platforming, but it's the combination of the enemy, environment, and even the aesthetic design that compounds to make it a strong contender. All of which will come to a head in Bilewater. If it hasn't been obvious from Sinner's Path and its polluted, but still somewhat livable environment, Bilewater makes it abundantly clear. This place has been defiled. Life here in these dark recesses is changed, twisted into something unnatural and unstable by the Citadel's runoff. We are far from the opulence and tenets of the faith. This place is such a fantastic contrast with the soothing music and the sheer fear and hostility of traversing these darkened halls. The enemies in here explode when you kill them, and the flying ones respawn shortly after death. There are traps everywhere, just waiting for you to misstep or not catch the thin ropes and the darkness. Stilken bugs who take long-distance shots at you, and then plunge into Nurgle's bathwater before you can kill them. And as a reminder, the nearest bench is all the way near the start of Sinner's Road. So when you die, you have to hike through all of that again just to get back here. As a final twist of the knife, if you do come here before entering the Citadel, you cannot purchase the map. You can find Chakra's ring taunting you, promising knowledge and sacred cartography, but she herself is too high up to reach, only attainable once you have the double jump, which will be hours and hours from now. But if you persevere in the darkness and make it all the way to the end, you happen upon the mist. So, bit of a funny tangent. I actually ended up here before going through the front door of the Citadel. The problem was, I arrived here too early, which let me have fun meandering about in this misty Lost Woods section for roughly an hour, trying to figure out where I was meant to go, until I just gave up. But for now, let's double back to Bilewater and take a bit of a time leap. With our full mobility kit, we can now resume our ascent. Now, there is no implicit reason or driving objective to do this. This entire area could just as easily never be discovered if you never went up from the halfway house in Greymoor. In fact, the only other entrances to Bilewater, not counting through Phantom since that's a one-way passage, is to go from above through an even worse region that is somehow even more horrific, or to fall down into a dank, dark pit in the archives, which could take you to another one of Team Cherry's pranks.
What the fuck? Oh!
If I could objectively say anything that Team Cherry did in terms of game design was just genuinely messed up, it's this thing. This squalling little thing is genuinely one of the most visceral things I've experienced outside of a horror game. If you pick up this bud, it just sits there in your key items tab, constantly making distorted baby noises. Something that I don't think I need to remind you, we as humans... You are human, right? Maybe I'm not anymore. Are biologically conditioned in our lizard brains to react to on command. But perhaps there is genius in that, considering what this little booger is involved in. But I'll leave that little treat for you. All I'll say is if you can't take it anymore, there's no shame in looking up where to put it. After all, it wants you to. But back to Bilehaven itself. You might ask, why did I go through all of this massive tangent? After all, none of this has anything to do directly with the Citadel. Because I want to talk about Groal the Great. I think everyone knows about this frog/not frog. Groal is one of the major pain points that people discuss when it comes to Silksong, and they're right. Though most of what Groal is beyond himself as a character or even a boss, Groal is Bilewater. The bugs that explode on death, the maggots, the traps, the Stilkins eager to take pot shots at you, these hulking behemoths who just flood the screen with yesterday's lunch. But herein lies the most funny prank that Team Cherry has in store. You see, high up in these spires of dread is a bench. A sacred bench. It's a bit far from Groal, about 4 rooms, which is, broadly speaking, much more than most walkbacks in the game. To Team Cherry's credit, the vast majority of walkbacks in Silksong are usually only 1 or 3 rooms. And there are some similar to the Dreamnail fights in Hollow Knight where you start pretty much right by the entrance without too much issue. I knew it. I fucking knew it. Wanna know something really funny about this bench in particular? There is no fixing it. It's just bait. Sweet, sumptuous bait, hanging in the desperate dark. But of course, there is a proper bench in Bilewater. 2 of them, actually. There is the one all the way down here at the entrance to the mist with a fast travel point, and the other one is... Well, you see, that's what makes this really funny to me. I never found it. It could have been many reasons. I just never found the breakable wall in the darkness, or when I found the route that required going into the soup, I was too close to death to even consider it, so I just never did. Every attempt against Groal took the long way around,
And while I could tell you how miserable that is, let me just show it.
Ready!
Speed gear! I will say that even not finding the secret bench, I'm pretty certain I am one of the lucky ones in the end. Having found a tool that grants temporary protection against maggots, it only took me roughly 5 or 6 attempts to kill him. I have seen multiple people just get straight filtered by the Groalback, and it's completely understandable why. It's not Groal himself. He's just a big floating meatball that wobbles around in the air, tries to vacuum you into his mouth, spits explosive balls, dives in and out of the slop, and in Phase 2 he'll shoot vengeful spirits. It's just the sheer amount of time the player needs to spend being on that's draining. You spend so much time trying not to lose any health or fall in the soup that by the time you get to him, your focus is waning. There are bosses that are much harder, that I have gleefully slammed my head on for hours, that were less exhausting than the Groal Experience. And while there is that one section where you can prey on the 3 jellyfish to heal, it's just the sheer time investment. And I think Team Cherry knew what madness they created here, since your immediate reward for popping Groal is a bench. Well, a bench and a collection of souls. Nah, that can't be important. Fortunately, all of this suffering is purely optional, so we don't have to worry about it. Right? Going back to the Citadel, it is a remarkable masterpiece in aesthetics and design. Silksong in general is an excellent showcase of gorgeous environments, vibrant colors, and excellent lighting, even in the deepest and darkest pits. But the Citadel's design of acting as a hub zone that branches out in a myriad of directions makes for a breath of fresh, non-linear air. You still have a directing goal, of course. Head to the peak of the Citadel, collect 3 keys, and then head to the apex to confront the Monarch, but unlike Act 1, where you only had 2 choices, the order is nearly limitless. I say nearly, of course, because you do still need to get one of the 2 mobility upgrades in Act 2. The Claw line, which I'll refer to as the Grapple just because it's easier on my tongue, is one of my favorite mobility tools in any game ever. I can't help it. The hookshot from Ocarina of Time carved itself into my soul. But Unlike that game and a number that have come after, the grapple is able to keep up with your speed to great effect. Yoink yourself across the screen quickly for a single silk strand. You can chain it repeatedly, allowing you to cross massive gaps so long as you can sustain it. It's also functionally a key, allowing you to hook onto rings and pull some extra switches. It's an excellent offensive tool, allowing you to zip toward an enemy and easily chain into another slash or start pogoing on their head. If I had anything to knock it for, is that there is a dead zone where if you are just too short from connecting with your needle with an enemy, Hornet is going to hurtle herself into them. You're going to run into this a lot, because while the game doesn't demand that you use it in combat, it's a very potent tool, allowing you to stay silk neutral, get back into the opponent's face, and follow up with more attacks or a silk skill. It's not free, even if you stick the hook, however, since you're locked into the animation for a few frames after bouncing off the enemy. This is also when the bosses are going to begin blending their archetypes a bit. I feel like I've spoiled plenty already, so I won't name names, but I don't think it's a coincidence that Act 2 is when certain rematches start to happen. They might not be the same character, but through the aesthetics and move kits, you can feel the principles of Giant, Duelist, and Set play melding and evolving together. Not enough to where all three are there at once, but to where it gets harder to define all of them as a single archetype. And while it's late, this is probably the best time I could touch upon something that Hollow Knight didn't have: a fleshed out side quest system. Wishes generally come in 4 categories: gather X amount of material off of enemies, track a monster or a person by following traces of evidence, donating rosaries or resources, gathering a number of an object and returning them, or just killing a mini-boss. They aren't bad, but they're very video gamey. Particularly the gathering quests, since the number required tends to be too high to be able to just passively do them while exploring. More than 10 just feels excessive, and some of them go up to 25 for no good reason. They're absolutely worth doing, since not only do you meet interesting characters, but they can give you tools, upgrades, more rosaries, or unlock little shortcuts throughout the world. I'll also include the Fleas in this section too. Just like the grubs in the first game, they act as a Golden Skull Tula sort of find X of these and return for a reward little side quest. Fortunately, there aren't that many of them, and much later on, you can eventually purchase the locations of where they're hidden on the map. They're also just cute, fluffy, adorable flying dogs, and they're precious. Half of the fun is just seeing how they wound up trapped. As a final critique, this is the point in the game where the economy just ceases to be a practical thing. True to the lore, the bugs and the Citadel drop the most rosaries, and all of the shops you find up here have their prices drastically inflated to compensate. It's to the point where just exploring and trying not to lose your beads to a chain dev isn't enough to purchase everything. Fortunately, there are a number of farming spots to choose from. My preferred route involved running across this hallway and bullying these colossal reeds. They each drop just under 40 a head, and the flat surface ensures no losses to spikes and pits. If you're intending for 100% completion, this is the point where you need to farm this out, because doing so later on is only going to get more inconvenient. In the interest of spoilers, what I want to discuss now will be impossible to keep vague. I cannot talk around what is about to happen, or show footage that won't just make things obvious. So if you're at all wanting to bow out to not spoil the end of Act 2 or 3, this is your last stop. I won't take it personally. After all, I'm just a random voice on the internet. If you've been listening to decide whether or not to play this game, yes, do it. Or at least, consider the first Hollow Knight. It is a much smoother onboarding curve to this game, but I'll say it now. Silksong, for what it's worth, is my game of the year. You still here? Good.
Let's take a dive. At the top right of the Citadel, Hornet finds a balcony overlooking Farloom. On it is a bell shrine, similar to the 5 scattered throughout the lower regions that bar one's way into the Citadel proper. Upon ringing it, an ornery curmudgeon chastises you for making so much noise, saying that all of the surviving pilgrims will be coming here thanks to that bell. Hornet doesn't care, or at the very least is undaunted by this, for she has other matters to attend to, but over time the caretaker's words ring true. Little by little, the last sane pilgrims and those who have been struggling to survive in the Citadel begin to gather here in safety. It's not much, but in a palace of the undead, this respite of life is their outer heaven. The caretaker slowly warms up to this, in his own way, offering some critical insight into how and why the Citadel is in such a decrepit state. Eventually, after completing enough wishes, he approaches Hornet with an idea, one that will change Farloom's destiny forever.
It's feeling almost time, eh, Bellringer? You and her, who waits up there. That fated meeting won't hold forever. Ready to make your play, to oust one ruler and claim her place.
I'll not deny some part of me desires that outcome. Dominance, it seems, is baked deep in my blood, as too, no doubt, for the one up top. And yet, another part resists. A part, over time, I find myself siding with more. The part wishes not to claim a monarch's mantle. Rather, it would see my freedom regained, and this kingdom's bugs unshackled from their pale chains.
Remarkable idea you're speaking there, Bellringer. A world cut free. Not a wish I've had much cause to hope on, serious like, but I ain't so surprised to hear you speak it. For all your helping, I've been seeing it clearer. You've still got the monarch in you, alright, and the glare of a weaver, but the ambition, that's wild different from both.
If you have already guessed to my desire, sir, and share some part of it, would you offer me aid in the conflict to come?
Why, maybe yes. I can barely bear to tell it. But there's an idea, one rare discussed, for fear of her up there sensing the score.
You have conceived a method, I take it? A way to see a monarch removed, and me left free from claiming her station?
We have. Me and what remains of my family. It's a trap of a sort, beyond the skill of this Citadel, one to go further than just her binding. You'd be just the hunter to set it, if you're dare enough to try.
Grant me your aid, sir. If your trap provides a path to freedom, both for myself and your land's bugs, I may indeed choose to trigger it. What work do you need of me now to see your service made?
It's more family strength you'll be seeking, Bellringer. There's 3 old bugs still alive, spread across this kingdom, and 1 poor cousin dead and drained in swamps choked rotten. Each has power, raw, savage stuff. For you, they'll give it, if for their fascination at the act, or the thrill of defiance, or because they have no choice at all. And last, as the base, seek a weapon of Weaver's past. Should still be one left down there in their largest nest. A snare to set a rune of searing silk. Our own trap'll be woven tight about it.
It is a good plan in hindsight. All throughout the game, Hornet has been devouring silk from the Weaver's statues and any living source of silk she can find, almost on pure instinct, and the player's guiding hand to drive her.
It's just such a shame that, in Hornet and the Caretaker's ignorance, they couldn't factor just who the Monarch and her daughter truly are. Hornet and the Caretaker couldn't know that Lace, the artificial being woven from silk and shadow, hated her creator so greatly that she would be more than happy to die spiting her, valuing denying her mother her precious captive over her own life. Nor could they know that Grandmother Silk, the godly tyrant whose threads have woven so deeply into the kingdom of Farloom that the majority of its subjects are bound to her by the very hubris of their ancestors, who ordered the abduction of not just Hornet, but countless other weavers and those with even a trace of weaver blood, just to pull back something from the weavers who abandoned her, would love her daughter so much that she would refuse to let her be consumed by the void, even if it meant bringing down her entire kingdom into the void with them. And it is from these intentions that disaster is spun. The void is now seeping up into Farloom through Silk's threads, corrupting and threatening to devour everything in its wake. Symphony of the Night was the first Metroidvania to flip the script like this, though Act 3 isn't quite so literal as the upside-down castle, nor is it as all-encompassing, but it is an impressive, if selective, alteration of the environment. Most of the change is understandably in the Citadel itself. The cradle and the core are absolutely demolished in the wake of Silk's fall, and much of the early game of Act 3 is spent just regrouping with your allies and trying to figure out what to do. Many friendly faces are unfortunately lost to the apocalypse, and once friendly and lively communities are now huddled together in fear and despair. They all know what Hornet does. Farloom's days are numbered, but not all of them have given to despair. Some still fight on, buying you desperate moments to try and right this mistake. The clock is metaphorically ticking, with Silk's haunting screams constantly reminding you of this, no matter where you are. This deep into the game is an odd time to discuss this, but I feel like now is the best time to bring up something that is one of the game's most controversial subjects: the 2 hit points of damage. I discussed before how Silksong starts off more aggressive compared to Hollow Knight when it comes to damage intake. What is curious about the game is that the damage profile doesn't really increase. Yes, there are some rare instances where you will take 3 in a single attack, but I only ran into 2 instances of it. The first is the last judge's desperation spin, and the last is Grandmother Silk's brutal command grab. By and large, everything else will only do 2. In Act 3, enemies will randomly be blessed with void, darkening their color palette, increasing their HP roughly 2-fold, if not 3, and giving them access to a number of new attacks. The Abyss literally bursting out of their bodies in the form of tendrils, saw blades, and explosive mines. They will also always do 2 damage, and most importantly, these darkness attacks will eat your silk, even faster than the maggots in Bilewater do. This results in a curious difficulty curve. Act 3 is hard, particularly some of the more oppressive bosses, but nothing is going to kill you any faster than before. The damage taken doesn't increase, just the speed and screen coverage of attacks. Thus, the early game feels the hardest, and then it levels out since by Act 3, you have more than enough tools and experience to handle almost anything. But thanks to the HP boosting from the Blessing, a lot of enemies that went from just speed bumps become speed boulders, robbing you of the joy of blitzing through once-conquered environments that make the closing hours of a Metroidvania fun. Though, the addition of new gauntlets filled with the Abyss-blessed enemies is rough. I'd like to say that most of my failings in these were due to my lack of sleep, but it likely comes down to enemies that you could quickly dispatch with just a silk bind, becoming much tankier. Once we reconvened with the Caretaker and his kin, who turn out to be Snail Shaman, practitioners and worshippers of the void, a plan of action is formed. Hornet must enter the abyss and put Grandmother Silk down for good to free Farloom from her dying grip. There is only one problem. GMS is so deep in the writhing dark that Hornet cannot possibly follow after her. So there is only one option left. A delicate, pale flower, long lost and existing only in Hornet's memory, must be conjured forth to light her way. But such a ritual would require a tremendous amount of power, old power, long lost to the sands of time. And yet there is a way. The shaman teach her a final melody to reach into the lingering memories of the dead, so that she may rip those beating hearts back to the present. Hearts from Farloom's former rulers, the ones whom the Citadel had long ago conquered ages ago. There is something foul about doing this, that to save the kingdom requires yet another humiliation to these dead and dying cultures. One last desperate desecration of graves better left alone. Hornet and the snails aren't ignorant to this either, but if it's the difference between a new tomorrow or being pulled into the abyss, it must be done. The first is King Khann and the Coral Tribe, skilled warriors adept at manipulating the coral to their whims. Their challenge involves what can only be described as the Gauntlet. 5 combat rooms bound together with only small intermission halls to feed off of. It is a mercy that there is a shortcut after the 4th room, but just getting past it is a trial in itself. And while I've griped about gauntlets in the past, I really did enjoy this one. Unlike the others, where you are dealing with enemies you fought before, most of these are brand new and unique to this area. I do waffle between whether it is a shame or a good thing that Khann himself is kind of a pushover, but this does make him unique compared to the other 2 rulers. He's a cool boss, being a literal earthbender, but with how aggressively he telegraphs his attacks, there are just far too many openings for you to safely hide, and his big X attack leaves him free to attack underneath it. If, or whenever, a Godhome DLC comes, I eagerly look forward to a rematch with him. The second is Nithia, the seed from which Shellwood bloomed. She herself is but a memory, with only a fountain and a single soldier to remember her name. Her fight is pretty unique, requiring you to master aerial combat, the grapple, and fighting on walls. She is a step up from Khann, but not a drastic one. I'd say the most challenging aspects of her are trying to react fast enough to her big explosion, and dealing with the slight bit of homing that her Death Blossom bullets have. To be honest, Nithia herself is less interesting than her guardian Seth. I found it curious that Captain America the Bug's theme could be so mournful and sad. There isn't much characterization or build-up to him. He simply blocks the path, asks you to leave, and when you say no, he attempts to add you to the graveyard he's sown. And he's got quite the green thumb, if I say so myself. He's probably one of the fastest, if not the fastest boss in the game, demanding quick reactions on a number of 50-50s, such as guessing when he jumps if he's going for a shield slam or a shield bounce. Once you defeat him, you can find him throughout Farloom, lost and stricken with amnesia, until he makes a home with the flea caravan. It wasn't until I looked into the history that I understood. To quote an article written by Todd Doré of TheGamer.com, Seth Goldman was a young man who was diagnosed with Ewing sarcoma, a form of cancer that grows from bones and the surrounding soft tissue. When he was informed that the diagnosis was terminal, his father contacted the Marty Lyons Foundation, a non-profit similar to the Make-A-Wish Foundation, who devote themselves to realizing the wishes of children 3 to 17 years old with terminal illnesses. Tragically, Goldman would not survive to see Silksong's release, though Team Cherry did show him footage of his character in action, and by all accounts he was overjoyed at seeing his creation brought to life. It feels weird to critique something like this, but I've always had a strange feeling about digital memorials in games. Similar to Ezra, the young man who Blizzard memorialized in World of Warcraft through a quest giver in Mulgore searching for his lost dog, Seth and Ezra both stick out slightly as something not quite belonging to the setting. Almost as if the out-of-placeness beckons you to seek out the story behind the character, to understand them. Which is likely the point, after all. Memorials are to be remembered. All forms of art and creation carry the impressions of the creators and the people and things that impacted them. That it is clear from all of this, and a special mention to Seth in the credits, that this young man made an impression on Team Cherry. The final heart belongs to Skarsinger Karmelita, the warrior queen of the Red Ants. Unlike the other two, there is a good chance you would already know who she is. Deep in Hunter's March is a statue erected in her glory. A cute little bug named Gilly recounts her, almost as if she were a long-lost legend, more myth than woman. This statue in particular is an excellent piece of work, both in-game and from a design standpoint. Throughout my entire journey, I kept remembering this statue and thinking something had to be behind it. So when the time came to begin my hunt, I knew just where to go. Unlike Nithya and Khann, Karmelita is alive, though she is a shadow of her former self. Bloated and withered, time has stolen her youth and strength, but not the love of her people, or her love of them. I knew right away that I was going to love this boss fight, when Hornet told her exactly what her plans were, and Karmelita dared her to try. There are boss fights that one could consider to be beyond such mediocre monikers as hard, challenging, unfair, brutal, etc. The Ur-Child in Etrian Odyssey Untold 2, the Nameless King in Dark Souls 3, the Demi-Fiend in Digital Devil Saga and SMT 5. Encounters that, in my eyes, elevate into being magnum opera of boss fights. All of them tend to be optional or super bosses, encounters designed to assume that you are at the peak of your potential power. I am convinced that a certain secret exists because of Karmelita. A hidden fourth option that allows you to bypass her in order to enact the ritual. One that I won't reveal here, because I still want things for you to discover on your own, even if it's one of my favorite story beats in the game. There is no question in my mind. Karmelita is the best and hardest boss in this game. Behind her is the true final boss and first sinner, but it's a tight race for second place. Everything, from how she is built, the flavor of the environment taking place on stage, how she is clearly modeled after the opera Carmen, the flow of her attacks weaving between each other in a smooth dance. It is always going to be a long fight with her, not only because she will deflect your swings if you don't get in fast enough, but because even though you have so much screen space to work with, she controls it, not through her actions, but her potential ones. Similar to Lace, most of her attacks focus on the ground. Her triple swipe, her lunge, her blade throw. But because of her massive somersault and the sheer speed with which she can deploy it, you are forced to fight her on the ground at her level. Every second you spend in the air is a second she could just catch you for free. When I mentioned earlier that duelists require you to act not in anticipation of what they're doing, but what they can do, I was referring to Karmelita. But perhaps the most interesting about her is that she doesn't get many new moves as the fight progresses. If we consider the Gauntlet as a prelude, Phase 2 gives her the only two new ones. This massive charge that covers her wake in spikes that force you into the air, and the option to follow up her throws with another one. Other than that, she just gets faster. And Phase 3, which to my recollection only the Cogwork dancers before her have, straight up gives her the ability to Roman cancel her ground moves. I think that is what makes her so great. At a certain point, she ceases to be another Metroid or Souls boss who are just going to do their pattern in the general direction of you and turns into a fighting game character. Team Cherry has succeeded with bosses like her and the true final boss to simulate what it would be like on the main stage of EVO. This whole fight is a long gauntlet of quick reactions. I gleefully spent hours slamming my head against her, gradually tinkering my methodology, swapping in tools or rethinking if-or scenarios, mastering the Prelude Gauntlet to the point I got it down to a near exact science. I didn't want to resort to just abusing the replenishing tools or swarm her to death with poison cogflies because I just had too much fun. I'm not a person who fetishizes challenge for the sake of it, or someone who believes you didn't do the fight right because you used summons or whatever tool or spell that helps you. No. I don't know how to quantify what it is, but when I find a route that works for me, even if it's unoptimal or there's something I could clearly be doing better, if I see a light at the end of the tunnel, I will push through, over and over and over again, groaning outwardly in frustration, but on the inside, I am euphoric. There is no breathing, no thoughts of anything outside of the circulation in my fingers. Only the flow, only the motion, only the opera. In its most pathetic and base form of being, it reminds me I'm alive. The only reason I stopped slamming my head into her was because I could feel fatigue clawing at my mind to sleep. And the greatest tragedy of all is that when I did wake up the next day to begin again,
I don't fucking believe it.
I got her on the first shot. With the 3 hearts we need for the ritual, we head back to the snails and dive into Hornet's memories. It is here we get glimpses to Hornet's upbringing. A princess who was raised by 3 mothers, one who birthed her, one who taught her to fight, one who taught her to live. All of this is generally things we could glean from Hollow Knight, which is why I wish to compound this by talking about something that is more implied than obviously stated: the similarity between Hornet and Lace. Both Hornet and Lace were created, not out of the love of their parents, but by an abject desire to use them as tools. For Hornet, the purpose is still speculative, but common theories tend to fall in 2 categories. Either to perpetuate the Weaver race, since when Grandmother Silk uplifted them from being base spiders, she only uplifted females as a way to control them, or to create a being that would eventually usurp Silk as a new god, one made, at least in part, their likeness. A drive that Hornet feels on an almost instinctual level to do, whether it's a pale being's need to dominate and rule, or an instinct that was instilled in her from years and years of surviving alone. In contrast, Lace was created out of Silk's desire to just have a daughter to rule over. After the Weavers, who realized the truth of how Silk viewed them, not as a family, but as tools to enforce her will on Farloom, abandoned her, Lace was created to fill that void. Shackled to the Citadel to guard a palace that was more of a tomb, or if you believe the theory that the entire Citadel itself is a music box to contain Silk, a prison. Who Lace is as a person, her vanity, her cruelty, her penchant for Ojo laughing, or her flights of whimsical madness and despondency, do not matter to Silk. Lace was at best a doll woven out of spite. And Lace knew this intimately. After all, to quote the brief glimpse into Silk's mind we get after collecting Lace's silk heart, better a child spun pure than them. Better a child spun frail than them. One to wish our waking. From our Silk, a child born loyal. Understandably, both Hornet and Lace despised the destiny that was foisted onto them. But where Hornet's three mothers, separate from the Weavers as a whole, wanted her to find her own way in spite of the machinations that led to her birth, Lace had no one. She was surrounded by undead thralls and the scarce living who feared her. She was utterly and dreadfully alone. Her hostility makes far more sense once you realize that Lace thinks the whole reason Hornet and all of the other Weaver descendants were being abducted by Silk was simply to replace her. Again and again and again. I think it is this connection that drives Hornet to plunge into the writhing darkness, carrying the shining Everbloom, a literal embodiment of her mother's precious love and care for her to light the way. What changes the objective from simply cutting Silk off from Farloom as one does an anchor, to rescuing a kindred soul? Or, based buggery. Lost Lace is an excellent encounter. I will hold Karmelita a bit higher simply because the intermission between Phase 2 and 3 drags, but if the Lace encounters are a Pokemon evolution line, Lost jumps straight past Venusaur into some eldritch mega-level Digimon nonsense. All of her core moves are here but augmented. The DP into Dive Kick reaches further. The parry into Thrust has been changed into a burst of tentacles. Her lunge leaves a trail of tentacles. Later on, she'll start to have darkness burst out of her, similar to the dark blessed enemies in Farloom, flooding the screen with buzzsaws, homing bolts, and tentacle traps. And her devastating judgment cuts that would make Virgil proud to add her to his growing collection of daughters. Like Karmelita, you are given a football field's worth of space, and you are going to need it. Lost just does not stop. She will not let up. She will not let you breathe. Even without her massive lunges, she practically wave dashes across the ground just to get to you. Completely willing to just Roman cancel out of any of her lunges to catch you in the air or trying to outrange her. Aside from just tool dumping on her with the Architect Crest, there's no easy way out of this. You just need to keep up with her. Find the holes and the ranges for all of her moves, and be ready to react on her 50-50s. She is the culmination of the duelist and set play archetypes, more than happy to hide in her tentacle traps to try and catch you trying to heal. But with enough determination, patience, and healthy amount of grit, you can win. You just have to be willing to make the dive again and again and again and again for it. If there is anything I could say when it comes to Team Cherry and Silksong, it is abundantly clear that the game that it is absolutely what they intended it to be. Almost all commercial art has to conform and bend in some way or shape in order to fit the certain realities. Companies have financial quarters and shareholders they need to attend to. Developers and support staff have families, and they need to be paid for their work. And audiences expect a certain amount of quality and value in their purchase. At a certain point, someone needs to be able to put their foot down and say, it just needs to ship. And whatever happened or whatever states it's in, that is it. It is a rare privilege to be able to take all of the time you want to make something. By all accounts, after the success of Hollow Knight, Team Cherry were easily set for life. They could have fulfilled their Kickstarter duties and just plopped Hornet into Hollow Nest and called it there. But they clearly wanted more. And if nothing else, I can say for certain that whatever they wanted to put in this game, from all of the bosses, the gorgeous and bespoke environments and creatures, to the trap benches and just how Groal, who I hand-waved as just being optional, was actually mandatory the whole time, and that neuron-burning little nightmare. They did it because they loved it, and no one had to stand over their shoulder and whisper, that's going to cause unnecessary friction. You should probably just do away with the compass, or shouldn't you tone down the implications? It might cause some blowback online, and that could affect our bottom line. Or, what good is it to waste development time on something that the majority of the player base will never see? Silksong is many things. A thrilling challenge for those who crave good boss fights. A labyrinth that, while at first is linear with a rigid structure, will eventually blossom into an open flower. A game that sets its tempo early and demands you to keep up with it or fall and try again, and again, and again. Filled with little details and touches that most people aren't ever going to see on a casual playthrough. It is a music box that if one were to pore over with a jeweler's loupe, could see all the little gears and pins delicately manicured to create something beautiful. One that, while not wholly unique, is clearly crafted with fine intent and purpose. It is, undoubtedly, exactly the game that Team Cherry wanted. A game that only they could have made. A game made by Team Cherry. And nothing I say to critique it can ever take that away from them. Even achieving 97% completion at the time of writing, I know there is far more things that I have missed. I know that there is in fact a third way to get into Act 2. Hell, there is potentially a fourth way to do it that speedrunners are currently testing. There are plenty of things I haven't brought up throughout this journey. I didn't get the chance to discuss all of the touches to the theme of motherhood, or how the big twist going into Act 3 is quite literally alluded to in the bestiary entry of Moss Mother. All of the little nuances, detailing how faith is abused and corrupted by greed and power. And even if the faithful discover that it was just a weapon, or if it's not entirely what it seems, that doesn't mean it all needs to burn to the ground. Children need not be permanently shackled to the sins and desires of their parents. Hell, I didn't even mention Sherma, the greatest and most precious little thing on the planet. Part of it is brevity, if you can call it that. But I still also want there to be things for other people to discover on their own. I remember a few years ago, when Baldur's Gate 3 was making the rounds, people were trying to hoist it up as the new standard when it came to RPGs, screaming, well, why can't all games be this good? And as people are wont to do, they quickly ripped the flag off that post and turned it into a cudgel to bludgeon people who rightfully pointed out that BG3 had a lot of privileges that most developers, hell, most artists in general don't have. They had no masters to be beholden to, no expectations or forced deadlines, only their vision and the means to enact it. And of course, years and years of time to sculpt the work, just as Team Cherry did. I worry and hope that the same thing doesn't happen again, because Silksong is an excellent game, fantastic even. It is my game of the year, though my experience is limited. I can just as easily see Expedition 33 or Hades 2 or any of the other baller releases throughout the year being that same champion. Hell, it doesn't even matter. All that matters is that miracles should be celebrated, not used as a weapon. Silksong is the fulfillment of a wish. Not mine, truth be told. I liked Hollow Knight enough to beat it and defeat Nightmare King Grimm once 7 years ago and go, well, that was really good, and then move on with my life. Just another game in a sea of different titles I've experienced between my occasional relapses back into the World of Warcraft void. But for those who did treasure it, who fell in love with the atmosphere, the lore, the strange mix of a grim dark world slowly rotting away into luminous decay, with goofy little bugs making funny blorbo noises. The game grew into a strange little cult, one that in the end did have their faith rewarded. To call that a miracle in the grand scheme of the world might be incredibly vain, but it is nice to see hope win out. It is nice to see faith rewarded. If there is one thing I could wish for, just as Hornet and Lace are able to at last come up for breath from the abyss and treasure their lives, it's that I hope everyone is able to move past the expectations and demands others put upon you and try to find your own happiness. The world may be getting worse day by day, but that doesn't mean we can't celebrate what there is, can't celebrate who we are. There are only so many sunrises, so we best make the best of them. Thank you for listening.